Welcome, and thanks for tuning in to another video from Thoughtful Programmer. I'm John, and today I'm continuing my thoughts about business objects. And specifically today, I'm thinking about the rules and behaviors of business objects. In a previous video, I talked about business object life cycles and how business objects are independent things that have life cycles of their own. And during that video, I also mentioned that business objects are subject to rules and have certain behaviors. And so today I wanted to go into that in a bit more detail and give you some examples of what the rules and behaviors of business objects can be. So I was looking for a good example, and what I came across was this. If you go online, you can find something called ZOHO CRM. It's an online cloud-based CRM system for customer relationship management. And because ZOHO CRM is a real-world example of business software that's provided as software as a service, we can inspect it to see good examples of common business objects. So, for example, within ZOHO CRM, there are business objects in their inventory management module. For example, they have a business object for products, a business object for price books, vendors, quotes, sales orders, purchase orders, and invoices. But let's take a look at the purchase orders in more detail. And what I'm going to focus in on first is the data within the purchase orders. So these are the standard fields of the purchase order business object. And as you can see, there's quite a few fields. Now, within ZOHO, they don't specifically break out the fields based upon the different lifecycle stages of the business object, but it's still useful to look at this example. Taking a look at the fields of the purchase order business object, we see that there are several fields, and if you know anything about business at all, these fields make a lot of sense. Purchase orders have their own specific numbers that can be used for tracking. It's important to know the contact information for the purchaser. We have the billing address, we have the shipping address. Now, so far I'm just talking about data, but what about the rules and the behaviors that are associated with this data that make it a business object? Well, the first thing to consider when you're looking at something like purchase orders data is that not everybody should be able to see all of that data. Based upon the role of the viewer, only certain fields should be available. So for example, if you are the employee who's delivering this purchase order, there's really no reason for you to see the billing address of the customer. And so that's the first aspect of a business object to consider architecturally, is what are the roles of the people who are going to be viewing this purchase order, and based on their role, which of this information should they be allowed to see? Now, very similarly, which of this information should they be allowed to modify? And that brings us to the second aspect of business objects, and that is what are the constraints that are placed on the valid values for the fields within the business object. So I've highlighted a few here. So for example, the unit price and the list price are very closely related. If you're modifying one, there's probably a rule about how you can modify the other. I've also highlighted the sales commission. There will be some rule within the organization that based upon the value of this purchase order is going to determine what the maximum sales commission can be. I've also highlighted shipping address. There are fields within the shipping address that must be validated against each other. For example, if there's a city and a state and a zip code, there's a relationship between those. The city must be within the state. The zip code must be a valid zip code for that city-state combination. So each of the fields within the purchase order may have associated with it rules for what the valid values are that can be set to. Now, the next thing about an object is its behaviors. And a good example of behaviors is what might happen when fields of the business object are changed, or what might happen based upon the values of those fields. So for example, here I've highlighted due date. Now, once the due date of a purchase order is set, it's very likely that triggers are set within the business software so that as you approach the due date, you might get an escalation of the processing of this purchase order. And that's kind of the linkage between the data and the business process related to the data is what's constituting the behavior of this business object. Now, I've also highlighted the field for quantity in stock. That's the same sort of data field that we're going to be looking at, because if, in this case, if the quantity goes below a certain value, we're probably going to have to take some sort of business action in order to deal with that. There are also things like within the purchase order, for example, the quantity field. Any time that the quantity field of this purchase order is changed, it is going to trigger other activity. For example, if that quantity is changed to a value that exceeds the quantity in stock, that could trigger a process for handling back orders, for example. I think that using this specific example of a purchase order business object probably gives you a better feel for the things that you need to think about when you are architecting a business object. When you're architecting a business object, it's not just about the data in that business object. It's about the data in the business object. It's about any rules that governs what values are valid for that business object. Those are sometimes known as constraints. You must think about the visibility of the fields within the business object. Who can view what and who can change what within the business object. And you must think about the triggers on the business object, that when values are changed or when thresholds such as due dates are approached, that you can kick off appropriate actions and appropriate business processes to ensure that the business object's behavior reflects the behavior that the business needs. So that's what I was thinking about today. I hope you found that useful. And as always, thank you very much for tuning in. If you like this content, please subscribe to this channel. And regardless, have a great day.